Greetings. It's Michael Davis here from Speaking CPR. Welcome to 3 Do's and 3 Don'ts for Influential Storytelling. Let's just spend a few minutes together today. Not going to take a lot of your time. It's Friday in most parts of the world. And where I am, it's Friday afternoon. I want to give you some insights on how to improve your storytelling. And these are actionable ideas that you can take with you right away and make your next story more influential, more effective. Before I dive into that information, I'm going to ask a little grace from you. I'm using some new technology with my StreamYard, and I'm still getting my feet wet with live streaming. I've done over 500 Zoom workshops, webinars, seminars, presentations in the last 4 years. I'm very comfortable with that. And what amazed me was when I started doing live streaming, how uncomfortable it was for me. Now, I'm not mentioning that to you to forgive my mistakes up front, because I'm going to make those. That's a given. I mention it to you because anytime you try a new technology or a new way of speaking or presenting, it's uncomfortable. Don't dwell on that. I'm not going to. I'm going to make mistakes, but more important for me is that you walk away. I'd love you to take at least one good idea, but there are 6 here or more that you can immediately put to use. And if you would like to join me, as far as maybe come on for Q&A a little bit later, I think I'm doing this right. You can check in here live with speakingcpr.com. I believe that link, it was working a half hour ago. We'll see if it still is. All right, with that, let's dive into the material. First of all, let's start with the first don't, which, all right, there we go. First don't is don't deliver your stories in monologue. Now, what does that mean? When we talk about delivering stories in monologue, that means that you're giving facts, figures, and information, but there's no heart to it. For example, as a speech coach, I can talk about a client that I worked with, and I can say something like, when I first met Joan, she was really stressed out. She wasn't happy about having to give this big speech. Does that connect with you? Probably not. The problem is those terms are labels. They're labels for emotions, but we don't feel them. They're too generic. There's a better way to present the information, and that is to, use character dialogue. What does this mean? This means letting us hear your characters with the words they say, the feelings they convey when they speak, instead of just labeling the feelings that they have. So for instance, when I'm describing my interaction with a client who I'm working with, I could say, well, Joan and I sat down and she said, Michael, I really need some help. I've got to give this presentation in 6 weeks, and I'm not sleeping well thinking about this. I'm so afraid I'm going to embarrass our organization. I have to do well because we haven't been getting enough donations to our foundation. And if I don't start giving better presentations, they're going to ask somebody else to take over my position. And I can't have that. I'll be honest with you. I'm not sleeping well. I'm stressed out. I'm not eating well. Can you help me? Can you feel the difference there? Do you see how now you're inside of her heart, her mind, you're getting a feel for those emotions? That's where we connect with our main characters on our stories, not by labeling what they're talking about. Good to see everyone. Hey, Alan. Hey, Ellie. Hey, Pam. Nice to have you with me today. Good to see you all here, my Stage Time and Toastmasters friends. All right, those are that's how you overcome the first don't, which is don't speak in monologue, do the dialogue, let us hear and feel your main character. Now, the number 2 don't is don't do long setups. What does that mean? One of the most common challenges I see with presenters is that they give a lot of backstory. They give facts. This happened, and then there was this. Oh, by the way, there was this. Yeah, and there was that one thing. Audiences don't like that. Now, you're giving too much backstory when your opening is connected with many different parts of your story are connected by the word and. Even if you don't see the word and or hear it, it could be fit into that the verbiage of the opening. This happened, and this happened, and that happened, and that. If you have a lot of those, you are going to lose people's interest. And it's a common issue we see all the time when working with our clients. What you want to do is shorten up the number of ands. And I'm a big believer in the rule of three. I'm not the first person to say that, but give us three important details about the backstory of your character, the guide, even a couple of sub-characters who push the story along, but no more than three. And what you do want to do, instead of just using a string of ands, is quickly get to the conflict, because that's where a story really begins. One of my favorite examples of this, I didn't create this, a gentleman named Park Howell, who is one of my favorite podcasts and authors on storytelling. He asked the question, is this a story? A princess, beautiful princess, meets a handsome prince. They fall in love. They get married. They live happily ever after. Is that a story? Not really. Not in the sense that we're trying to teach it as far as keynotes and business storytelling. And if you think about it, that is a series of and statements. However, you can change the entire story by adding a single word followed by some additional information. And that single word is, dramatic pause, but. That's the word. It doesn't always have to be that word. It could be yet, however, some variation of that. So let's revisit our story about the princess and the prince. And I'm going to use the word and but here to emphasize this concept. There was a beautiful princess, and she met a handsome prince, and they fell in love. And they lived happily ever after. But then there came the abduction. What just happened in your brain? We went from a series of and statements that didn't create any curiosity at all into the world of the unknown. Questions abound. Who got abducted? Why did that person get abducted? Who did the abducting? What was the end result? Was there bloodshed? Did the person safely get returned? We have all these questions. Research has shown the human brain loves curiosity. It is a very curious creature that we have in our heads, in between our ears. However, we also have to answer that eventually, so we can't leave open loops. That's a topic for another presentation. But just know that the word but, however, yet, until, starts the story in a new direction. It begins the conflict, and that's where your narrative really takes on life and grabs the attention of the audience. That's why we don't want to wait too long. If we give a series of 5 minutes of backstory of and, people check out. They start grabbing their phones and they look for something else to do. So as quickly as you can, give us some backstory. We want to see what Michael Haig, my friend, the Hollywood storytelling scriptwriting consultant, talks about. We need to have a little bit of the backstory in the ordinary life of the main character, but get us into, there was a but, by the way, but then we need to get into the conflict as soon as possible to create interest and build tension. All right. Now, there are two types of conflict also that we want to talk about. We won't spend a lot of time on these, but you need to hear it. The first kind is external conflict. This is the obvious conflict. This could be a conflict between two people. It could be between a person and an organization. It could be a person versus nature. That's an important conflict because it gets the ball rolling in a new direction in the story. However, that's not the most important conflict. The most important, is the internal. That's where people begin to connect with your main character. The reason this is so important is because sometimes the external conflict in our stories is not relatable. We hear about people who nearly died climbing Mount Everest or K2, some of the big mountains. somebody who had to overcome a physical disability, maybe somebody who really had to train extra hard to earn an Olympic gold medal, right? We can't relate to that. I have a story I'm working on right now about driving a real Indianapolis-style race car at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, not in a race by myself, at 154 miles an hour. And most people aren't race car fans. They're not going to relate to that. They can't relate to going 154 miles an hour. They think I have a screw loose, which is possible. But again, key word, what connects them is the internal feeling that the character goes through. My story is about feeling a tremendous amount of fear, anxiety, and tension about driving that car because of an orientation that I had to sit through for an hour before I got into the car. Scared the heck out of me. Created all this negativity in me. People can relate to negativity, whether it's driving a car, starting a new job, beginning a new relationship, doesn't matter. That's where we hook the audience, is with the internal conflict. But we've got to have the external first to set up the internal. If you try it the other way around, it doesn't make as much sense. It doesn't flow as smoothly. So those are the first two sets of don'ts and do's. The third set begins with, please don't tell other people's stories. I know you and I have been inspired by stories of great people, terrific leaders in the past, and they can be inspiring. But there's also a problem. A lot of the stories, the most common ones, are so overused that audiences a lot of times roll their heads and say, okay, here we go. I'm about to hear about Abe Lincoln for the 519th time. Yes, I know Abe lost every single election he was ever in until he was elected the 16th president of the United States. Heard it before. How about this one? Thomas Edison and the light bulb. If you haven't heard these stories a lot, it's only because you're a newer speaker. I promise you, you're going to. How many times have you heard Thomas Edison and his 1,000 light bulbs, or 10,000 or 5,000, whichever version you're hearing, right? We all know the Lincoln and Edison stories are about persistence. And this next one is a favorite of the National Speakers Association professional speakers. They still joke about it. It is the starfish story. This is one that's been so overused, you literally hear people in the audience groan when a speaker says it. If you don't know what the starfish story is, I ain't going to tell you. All right. Just go Google starfish kid on the beach story. You'll have it. You'll also hear or read a story that people have heard in audiences all over the world. Now, why am I belaboring this point? Because authenticity and originality is what audiences look for today more than ever. And if you're telling those kinds of stories, they know that you don't have original thoughts, or they perceive that you don't have an original perspective on your topic. What we need to hear is your stories. Your stories are the most powerful because you've lived them and you've got the most emotional connection to them. Now, here's the problem that most people have. And I know for all of my stage time friends, people in Toastmasters, you've heard us talk about this before. Personal stories often, people don't appreciate or recognize the power of their own stories because they lived it. I knew this for years, but I didn't truly understand it until one day, 20 years ago, I was sitting in my kitchen with my mom. We were having lunch. Now, my house at the time, nice, fully air-conditioned home in northwestern Cincinnati. I lived about 2 miles from the local grocery store. Those facts are important for this story. My mother was born into German-occupied France during World War II. Her earliest memories are of her parents, and her older sister hearing air raid sirens at night, rushing down a flight of steps across a big parking lot into a bomb shelter almost every night. In the morning, when they'd get up, because obviously they survived or I wouldn't be telling the story, the question they had wasn't, oh, what are we going to eat today? It was, are we going to eat today? And every day, My grandma and grandpa took my mom and my aunt, walked them into the nearest village about a half mile away. And they would stand in line. And some days they actually got some food rations. Others, they didn't. They would do things like wait around for the German supply trucks to come in that were there to unload to feed the German soldiers. And if you were lucky, some potatoes would fall out of a bag. My grandma and grandpa would scoop those up, put them in their pockets, take them home, and that would be their soup for the day. Now, as my mother is telling this story, sitting in my fully air-conditioned home, 2 miles from a grocery store that was open 24/7, I didn't know what to say. I was stunned. I'm like, Mom, I didn't know this. I didn't know the French had it that bad during the war. The only question I could ask her was, Mom, how did you do that? How did Grandma and Grandpa do that with you and Aunt Nicole every single day for 4 years? She looked at me for the longest time and finally said, Honey, that's just what we did. Not to refer back to Edison, because I told you don't tell that story, but that was a light bulb moment for me. I know it's cliche. It was the lesson I needed to learn about why people don't understand the power of their own stories. You lived it. You've had the difficulties. You've had the struggle, but that was just what you did. Even when it's extreme, I've heard people who've lost limbs, who've been through major financial catastrophes and got through it on the other side and said, well, I just did what I had to do. We look at those people and think, oh my God, it's phenomenal. Other people look at you the same way. I promise. You just don't see it because you're too close to the story. I'm the same way. Yeah, I've been an IndyCar fan for 42 years, been to 41 Indianapolis 500s. I've driven an Indy car a couple times. I think it was cool, but some people look at me like, wow. I'd accept that. To a lot of people, that's a phenomenal thing I've done. I loved it. It's a great story. You've got those too. Which begs the question, where do I go to find my best stories? Let me give you 3 quick tips. These are 3 of my favorites. First thing you do, go to your bookshelf, go to your Kindle. Look at the books, the topics that are your most favorites. Which topics are the ones you love to read about the most? I realized 20 years ago that I need to be a speaker and a speech coach because of my bookshelf. I was a financial planner at the time, and I had dabbled in speaking through Toastmasters, had been a member for maybe 10 years. One day I was on the phone with what's called I can't even think of the name, wholesaler, a mutual fund wholesaler, somebody who sells mutual funds. And he's talking and he's saying the same old script they all say. So I'm sitting there like this, and I happen to look over at my bookcase, and I started counting the books. There were 52 books. 50 of them were about speaking and storytelling. 2 were about financial planning. And that was the day I realized I'm not doing what I should be doing. My bookcase was telling me something that nobody else could tell me or I wasn't hearing. Go take a look at your bookcase. Take a look at your Kindle. The topics in there are going to give you all kinds of stories and help you connect with stories that will impact others. The second area you should look, I'm not the first person to talk about this one. Over on the left, that's my phone. Those are pictures I've taken in the last 30 days. Go look at your phone. There's a reason those pictures are on there. There's some emotional connection you have with those topics. Go look at them. There's plenty of information or plenty of opportunities for you to create stories on that phone. You just don't see it. And the last is, actually, I should say the third because there are plenty others. This is really my favorite. Go to your t-shirts. Go to your closet, go to your drawer, pull out your t-shirts. If you've got t-shirts with any kind of label on them, there's a story. Why did you buy the darn thing? I have t-shirts from concerts I've been to, places I've been, the Indianapolis 500. If you know me by now, I've got I think I've got a dozen indie t-shirts, right? Got all kinds of racing t-shirts, stories galore. The problem is we look at them, we put them on, we need something to wear. We don't really look hard at those and say, what's the story behind that? There's something extraordinary there. There are lessons you've learned that other people can benefit from. All right. I've taken plenty of your time today. I promised when I was promoting this, I wouldn't take a tremendous amount of time. What I'll do is give you some, just a quick recap and then another opportunity for a program I'm going to do next week. These are the 3 do's and don'ts of influential storytelling. I hope at least one of these was beneficial to you. In fact, if you've watched me at all on some of my work with stage time or my own presentations, go ahead and put at least one takeaway in the chat box that you got from this. While I go through this very quickly, just the recap. These are the 3 do's and don'ts. Don't deliver in monologue. Deliver in dialogue. Let us hear your characters' thoughts and feelings. Number 2, do not deliver long setups. People get bored and there's no tension to that. Get to the conflict as soon as possible. Number 3, don't tell other people's stories. Tell your stories. Those are the ones that will connect with other folks. All right. If you would like, well, I'll tell you what, let me look at the comments real quick. Love this from Michael. When you're given no choice but to do extraordinary acts, it doesn't seem extraordinary to do them. Michael, amen. You just do what you have to do. Ellie has blogged about her heart shapes. I think you're talking about your t-shirts there. Be honest to yourself, not the audience. Love that, Alan. Look at your books and write a story, Ellie. Yes. Pam, create the conflict quickly. Let's see. When you're given no choice, got all that. Happy to share the story. I think it's probably the one about my mom. It's one of my favorites. Yes, and Ellie, you knew I was going to say conflict a while back. Hey, Mac, it'd be good to see you. All right. Here's what I'm going to do next week. I'm going to do another complimentary program. This one is going to be a deeper dive into storytelling. We're going to talk about the 5 keys to storytelling success. How do you structure your story so that you're grabbing people's attention right up front, keeping them from start to finish, and then leaving them with inspiration to take some kind of action, change the way they think, feel, or do. Number 1 benefit is you're going to feel more confidence in your stories. Number 2, you're going to quickly earn the trust of your audience because they're going to relate to that story. Number 3, you're going to save a tremendous amount of time because you'll have a format. And number 4, you'll increase your influence because people buy into the individuals whose stories they buy into. This program will be next Thursday from 12 Eastern. About 12 to 1, roughly about an hour. And if anybody comes with an idea for a story, I'm happy to do a little bit of live coaching. So we will definitely make that available. 12 o'clock Eastern, 9 Pacific. Just like we did here on live stream today, you don't need to register or sign up. Just show up. No sign up, just show up. With that, I'm going to let you go for the rest of your day. I appreciate you being here. If you have any questions at all, if I can help in any way, just contact me, mike@speakingcpr.com. I've had that across the bottom here the whole time, but just in case you didn't catch it, mike@speakingcpr.com. Be happy to talk to you. For my stage time friends who are part of Improv, I will see you tonight. Otherwise, hope to see you next Thursday when we talk about the 5 keys to storytelling success. See you then.